done this. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode number 33. And this is actually part 2 of our previous podcast that we did with our guest this week, Mathura Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, lovely to be back on your podcast.
It's great to have you back, and we've had so much positive feedback since part 1, where we talked about I think probably the first 24 years of your life from 1956 through to I remembered, and through to 1980. So your story is fascinating in terms of the stuff that you shared with us in those first 24 years, in terms of joining the Hare Krishnas, meeting the devotees. You were with Srila Prabhupada when he left the world in 1977 in Vrindavan. You were one of the devotees that discovered Radhadesh, which is a very nice ISKCON kind of castle temple in southern Belgium. And it was just wonderful hearing your story. And, you know, you're a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and you have so much to tell the world and share with the world, which is wonderful. And just before we got together today for this podcast, I was just looking through and watching through part 1 and some of the things we talked about. And we were kind of finishing off part 1 with discussing some of the problems and issues with an institution, how sometimes an institution can get in the way, or it can be a barrier, or it can hold us back. And we're kind of starting our discussion this week with kind of coming out of the bubble. Mm-hmm. You know, so tell us a bit about that in terms of what was it like coming out of the bubble in the early 1980s, late 70s, you know, from the kind of, I guess, shackles of ISKCON.
That's one way of yes, shackles.
Maybe shackles is not the right expression.
I think, I mean, if you know, my story, you can actually see, you know, if people go back to that. I'm not going to repeat everything that I said, but as I kind of, you know, I had my training in the temple in Amsterdam, then I come to India, I start maturing, getting interested in things, you know, like the culture, the music and everything. And as I'm going through that process, I'm kind of individuating. It was a Jungian term, you see. You know, there's the institution that I'm going through, but me as an individual, I'm going through a process and a journey. And one of the things that where I went, and I mentioned, is I got deeply into Indian aesthetics and culture, the art, the music. I started to learn tabla. I met loads of famous musicians, Pandit Jasraj, one of the great vocalists. I went to Calcutta. So I got into all that, and then suddenly I had these confrontations, leave the institution, and all this identity that I'm building up within that, the shackles of ISKCON, or the confines or the bubble of that framework, and just Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But you see, I'm quite a different person when I've left ISKCON than when I was in the mid-period, you could say, when I was a Sankirtan boy in Belgium and Holland, you know. Gradually, my nature changed, and I started to kind of individuate. So when that bubble burst, I had gone through a process of gradually kind of like not being able to be as kind of like the same person as I was when I joined, you know. But I didn't know where, you see, you know, and most people, a lot of my friends just at that time, they'd gone through a similar process, and they were all doing this thing where they were all getting married, basically, you know. And I just taught a friend today, and people in India, about 3 friends who had been on the library party, all suddenly got married around that time I left ISKCON. They all got married to Indian wives, you know. You know, Bhima in Bombay and the BBT, Nutama, who's a very nice devotee, and the devotee I was talking to, Abhinandan, who was one of the main people on the library party. So I was going through my journey as a group, but where was I going to go? That was the question, you see. And so I'd forged my identity, and I was into I mean, even by anyone's standard, the stuff I was interested in, it's not, you know, I was really into kind of very esoteric Indian music and stuff. You know, really, I have to say, the literature part of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, I kind of went a bit soft on it for a while because I became obsessed. I didn't mention last time I had a very big kind of peak experience in Bangladesh reading Brihad Bhagavatamritam by Sanatana Goswami. I kind of reconnected with the esoteric interior core through that book. And when I got back to England in the beginning of the summer of 1980, after being in ISKCON and came out of that bubble, I kind of had a friend called Shivanath who was ahead of me. And it's through him I'd heard in India that he was working in the restaurant. So I thought, okay, maybe I can have this. I'm not going to jump straight out into the world. I'm going to go into this next step, which is not being in the temple, not under a GBC, but I'm still going to be connected. So I lived in this house in Finchley with a whole bunch of other devotees that had belonged to a Mauritian life member. And we were the gang that worked. It wasn't called Govinda's at that time. When it opened the restaurant in Soho, it was called Healthy, Wealthy and Wise, you see. So I kind of came into that. And what do you do? I mean, the first thing I did was, it's crazy, but before I joined, when I was a teenager, I couldn't really shave or grow a beard or anything. But I'd always wanted, when I was a kid, I used to wake up dreaming I'd grown sideboards, and I woke up and I was still a teenager and I couldn't do it. So what I wanted to grow a moustache for some reason or other. So the first thing I did was grow a moustache for my identity. I grew my hair. And I have to say, when I was working at that restaurant, you're in the middle of London, Time Out magazine became my new Bible, really. And I became obsessed with catching up on movies that I hadn't seen all those years. Okay, that's just to give you an idea.
So can I just, the Healthy, Wealthy and Wise restaurant, is that now where Govinda's is? And so
it's exactly the same. Exactly the same. They just changed the name.
Okay.
Because I had actually set up the first Govinda's in Europe, in Amsterdam, with Vimukta Sangha. You know, there was one in Los Angeles, but we set up the first one in Amsterdam. And then that's when I went off to India just before Prabhupada left, after we set that up, you see. When I went to work at Healthy and Wealthy Wise at this time, I wasn't a cook. I had a job. We got a salary. It was weird. All those years working as when I was on Sankirtan collecting lots of money, you never even dreamt of keeping a halfpenny for yourself. It was all savor. But now it was a different phase. I was connected with ISKCON, but I wasn't in it. And there's a kind of disclaimer I want to give to the people who are listening to this. Oh, Mathura, he's this Hare Prabhupada disciple. So the story is about, I've told you, very dedicated, 4 regulative principles for years and everything, and then suddenly out of the bubble. Okay. And generally what happens to people who come out of the bubble is they start kind of moderating their kind of relationship with the 4 regulative principles, And so I have to say, my kind of all that in, so from 73 to 1980, most days getting up at 4 o'clock, having shower, 16 rounds. And when I was in the temple, that intense, sadhana, you do that focused life, 5 hours of sadhana from 4 in the morning till 9 before breakfast every day. And it becomes normal, you see. So when you suddenly go out of that bubble, some people stay very staunch. We don't everybody go through this same pattern, and I was also a pioneer. There was very, very few people doing what I was doing. And there was a bit of a derogatory term used by devotees like me who were kind of still into Krishna. It's not that they're total apostates and rejected everything, but they were kind of like, grown their hair, grown a moustache. These are all signs that you're not on the kind of like as staunch as you were, So the term was called fringy. So I was one of the first kind of early pioneers of being a fringy.
Wow.
And then, all sorts of things that you've kind of put on the back burner for years. I was a brahmachari, and see, I joined so young. It's another thing to take in consideration. I kind of went from college, school, and stuff, and I didn't even kind of enter into the world. I kind of went from that straight into being like a student brahmachari, you see. So I hadn't had the whole experience of the world. I had the experience of Krishna movement, and then all these other experiences in the latter part, 79, being more free, but in India, you know, but very much with the Krishna thing.
So when you started to feel more free, what kind of things did it give you the freedom to travel? Did you go and experience more things in the early 1980s? What kind of things did you actually do?
Well, basically, you have to survive. So I had the job at the restaurant. So that was all centered around just, you know, what do? You know, I think I signed on as well. I was getting a bit of that and a bit of that. So I decorated my room. That's what I'm obsessed. Kind of like, you see, I like things to look nice.
It looks wonderful. Your background looks wonderful.
I decorated my room at this house in Finchley. I put lots of money. People thought, I'm mad. And then I reconnected with my old friend, Chanarari, who I knew from Amsterdam, traveled in India, and he was in Los Angeles. And he said, come over to Los Angeles. And I knew that LA was a huge fringe community of devotees. Generally, you know, a lot of the American devotees had been on it for longer than the Europeans. We were like, many Americans were, you know, the first person I met when I went to Los Angeles. So I arrived in Los Angeles so I started at the restaurant in the summer, and I was in Los Angeles maybe a couple of weeks just before John Lennon got assassinated, because I just arrived, was meeting friends, and then John Lennon got shot. So it was November 1980. And I mean, one of the great heroes that I had within the Krishna movement, because I was an artist, was Bhadaraj. And it was Bhadaraj who in Vrindavan had been singing the kirtan when Prabhupada started showing symptoms of leaving. And he was the kind of like the preeminent artist, you could say, and he, you know, that front cover, the iconic front cover of the first Gita, that's Bhadaraj, you know, the universal form. And then within hours of arriving in Los Angeles, I was sitting there, and then with another very famous devotee called Uttama Shloka, who had been the president of Chicago Temple, very, very well known, and my other friend Nishtray Gunya, who would help Surabi Swami build the Bombay Temple. But now suddenly we were all out of that institution, and we were all doing our own thing. I mean, you know, Bhadaraj had been out longer, and he had a beard. Uttama had a moustache, you know, and it was almost like welcome to the gang. It's like a new chapter, you know. And they were meeting me, and we shared stuff, and we all got it on because we loved Indian culture, you know. Not all Indian Krishna devotees had the same kind of obsession or attraction with Indian culture. So I hung out with them in Los Angeles with my friends and went through a journey. And I have to say, my sadhana was getting weaker and weaker and weaker. I started taking up some of my old habits that I had had before I joined. I went back to smoking marijuana again, but with it throughout all of this story, it's not that Krishna disappeared out of my life. I was surrounded by Krishna devotees. I was living around Culver City near where the temple lived. And so we were going to the temple, and it was this new world. And this was the culture. Devotees had come into ISKCON. We'd gone through this process. A lot of them had got married. I hadn't. They were older. They'd maybe even divorced now. They had jobs. They were out of the bubble in different ways. And so that was part of the lifestyle. It was the community. Instead of being in the temple with shaved heads and rah, it was all right. Okay, now we did that. Now we're in this other phase of our life. That was kind of what we were going. And it was a struggle to survive, you know. So I did go traveling, but I didn't have money to go all over the world and do all these different things. I was still, I was beginning to really miss India, after, you know, and so I met Surabi Swami in Los Angeles, and he said, I'm going to be setting up this business shortly in Delhi. I've been offered a house in Punjabi Bagh, which is now...
This was the early 80s. This was the early 80s.
Very early, yeah. No, late 80s. Like I said, John Lennon had just got shot. And it was going 80, 81. And Surabi kind of gave me, I had a kind of a hint of where I might be going in the story, because he stayed in my room that I had in Amsterdam, and I had decorate, and he knew that I taste, and I'd done the rest. And he built these big temples, and, you know, he wanted someone to come. And not only that, I had made all these connections with all these top Indian artists. B.G. Sharma, Narottam Narayan, Indra Sharma, S.M. Pandit. And so I was this connections person, basically. Even Bhagavan liked me for all of this, you see. My goal, I wanted to be a part, I wanted to offer my services about the things that I was interested in for ISKCON, and also the fact that this is what inspired me and made me think of Krishna, the music and the art. And so Surabi in Los Angeles said in the future. So I came back to England after being in Los Angeles, and met another friend of mine called Shivanath, who'd been outside of the temple. Amazing. He went to stay with his parents in Yorkshire. He had a little Makanchor deity, and he convinced his Yorkshire parents that when he went off doing sales, they would offer his Makanchor milk every evening. And he read the Kishori Mohan Ganguly translation of the Bhagavad Gita, that's Mahabharata, and he'd read it 3 times.
Wow.
Volumes. And he knew the Mahabharata inside. So I'm associating with devotees. He'd gone to, and he's older than me. He'd lived in India, Radhakund. He'd joined in Australia. And so we had this incredible, and one of the things that happened was when I went up to meet him in Manchester, it rained for 7 days. And we were going to sell paintings and pictures, but we couldn't do it. So we ended up talking and talking for 7 days. And one of the things that we both realized was that, there was all these problems with the Krishna thing that we'd gone through, but at the same time, we really did crave a community, and we missed it. I mean, not everyone had the same experience, but in Amsterdam, specifically between 75 and 77, we had what's called the golden age. When people say, hey, they were the best years of my life when I was there. So I could have said, if people who had been in Amsterdam during those periods, and we had a wonderful temple president, Lochanananda, and it was a lot of it was to do with his personality. Not everyone had the same experience, but my experience I was missing it. I was missing, I wanted, but I didn't want to do it the way that I'd been. I wanted to kind of live with devotees, do devotional things, but repackage it. I suppose one of my realizations after being studying the Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we had this amazing, incredible philosophy and theology. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you've got all the books that Prabhupada translated, but then when you start to read other books like Brihad Bhagavatamritam, like I did with the Sanatana Goswami, a Gaudiya Math translation, and Jaiva Dharma by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, it gets so refined, you get into the depth. And also when I was studying Kirtan research, it's very esoteric. The core kernel of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And then, when you're in the movement, you're kind of so in it. And then I think I expressed in that last talk with Bhagavan, I'd been thinking a lot about it. And I realized there was an identity crisis with the institution about what it was meant to do, where it was meant to go, and what it was meant to do with people like me that have gone through this process, the training, and how to sustain us rather than just send them all out on Sankirtan, So it was all a question of, I suppose, my journey was, who am I now? Well, with all these things I've learned, but my critique was great philosophy, great theory, very hard to apply. Because in many ways it was successful, but in other ways there were these problems with the institution and the institution in general. And that's when I was writing my book and looking at this word inevitable comes up, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he set up an organization, because a mutt, he was quite critical of religions and where it went and how people became the negative side of it. People became attached to positions and things. And Prabhupada was so aware of that. He'd gone through all of that with the Gaudiya Math and wanted to try and set up an institution that avoided all of those problems, but at the same time was highly aware that these things were inevitable in an institution, you see. So I wanted to kind of have an experience which avoided, what is it possible to have a group of us live somewhere and avoid that? That was a quest I wanted to go on, and I was considering.
So you were invited to go to Delhi in the 80s, early 80s. Did you take up the invitation?
I did, actually. And I actually went there, wrote a letter, said, Surabi, okay, I've had enough here. I'm ready to come.
Okay.
Okay. And funnily enough, just before I went in the Christmas, I went over to Radhadesh, and I spent the Christmas there with my friend Vimukta Sangha, who was who's the regional secretary, and even Bhagavan came for a visit, and I got to meet him. But simultaneously, while this was happening, one of the major first big schisms, you could say, in ISKCON was happening. This was exactly at the time while this was going on. Because I was back in ISKCON, I was hearing what was going on. Jayatirtha, one of the gurus, was in Mayapur and splitting from the organization, beginning to split and go over to see Sridhar Maharaj in Navadweep. You see, you've got the Ganga, you've got Mayapur, ISKCON, Gaudiya Math, and on the other side, different Goswamis and different godbrothers of Prabhupada who had their mutts. And so this is the beginning of a big thing that started to happen. I'm just being a fringy, but now there's a whole bunch of people that don't want to be fringes. They want to just align themselves with another advanced Vaishnava.
Yeah.
They were missing. I personally, to tell you the truth, even though I have great respects for all of Prabhupada's godbrothers, I didn't have a problem with I always felt connected with Prabhupada in that I mentioned when you were in the temple, Prabhupada was hardly ever at any temples, hardly anybody had personal association, but you felt Prabhupada by doing what he wanted to do and doing the service, and that's what he taught. You actually associate by the guru by kind of doing what he wants, not just being in physical proximity, you see. So that, and then I realized, and it's also in retrospect now, especially, I realized how well primed I'd become. I use that word. Some people might use the word indoctrinated. There's a negative, but I would say that I voluntarily joined ISKCON because I wanted to dive deep and become absorbed in this culture. You know, and that process over years, every day having Bhagavad Gita, what it does to you, it goes to your deepest being. So you think in a certain way, and it never left me. So when I burst out of that bubble, I went into the world. Still, and that's what this process of individuation over these next 40 years, which is going to bring us today, was what is my relationship with Krishna? The institution has not really served my purposes up to now. And I kind of put the institution, it was kind of irrelevant. So when I went to join Surabi in Delhi, I made a deal. You know, I had a mustache and stuff like that. And I said, I will wear a dhoti and stuff like that. I'm not a dhoti, I wear a lungi when I'm at the temple, but I'm not in ISKCON. I'm working for you on a project and it's Krishna related. And that was fine. Nobody expected me that now I'm suddenly going to shave my head, be in ISKCON. No, I was working specifically. And it was great. Surabi trusted me. And I feel quite chuffed that a great designer, he actually asked me to design all of his offices in Punjabi Bagh. So, but before we did that, I took him round. He wanted me to show him all my art connections that I had made. It's because he started a business, and this is what was happening. People in Europe and America they went on to selling paintings and posters, and it was going on in Hong Kong, but also and that was he was just one of the main businesses, and he wanted me to work with him and help him do that.
I'm quite keen in a minute for us to talk about something that you were going through in the mid 1980s.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about a particular country that's quite topical today in the news.
Yes.
So you spent a bit of time in India, and did you say Nepal as well?
Yeah, for this art business.
Yeah.
Part of we were buying from a wholesaler in Delhi.
Okay.
And he was showing us tankas from Nepal, not just Indian Rajasthani silk paintings. And so Surabi said, why don't you go up to Nepal and research for me tankas? So when I got up there, Kathmandu is famous for many things. It was the El Dorado at the end of the hippie trail overland in the 60s and 70s. And there were places there, such as the Eden Hashish Center, where you could buy hashish legally, you see. So it was famous as this place. So, and I was doing my thing. I wasn't following all the 400 principles. Didn't seem to bother Surabi because I was good. And then I met two German devotees who'd been on that exciting adventure I explained earlier, overland during the Iranian Revolution. And so I knew them. They were there and they were involved in the scene, basically. And I got invited down to Pokhara basically, by one of the friends. And Kathmandu was a city. I'd been in Delhi. It was getting, when I went up there, it was so hot. India in May and June, it's all unbearable. And then you get to the Himalayas, it's like, whoo, I can relax now. But I'd never been to Pokhara, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. Okay. Anyway, I got involved with these chaps, and one of my friends started to have an idea, fantasy about building a temple in Pokhara, right near this lake, okay, for the local people, but funded by dodgy means. Okay. Now
Okay.
I'm being quite open in this talk. Some people who might be kind of stalwart Hare Krishna devotees, they might be thinking, why is this Prabhupada disciple talking about these naughty things? I'm talking about them because they're real. Basically, this is my story, and I'm not trying to kind of I'm not trying to glorify myself or have some kind of justification for what I did. It's one of the things that has happened to me in my kind of choice to move out of this bubble and kind of like go off on my path and see where it went, because I didn't know. And this is where it was going. It went off in this weird zigzag direction, you see. So I ended up there, and through these connections, you know, all these stories that I'm going to tell are extremely long, and many of the stories we talked about in the first part of my podcast are all on a series of 26 videos that, you know, we did 2 hours. I've got 26 videos that if you want to know the the whole detailed description of Prabhupada's passing, the whole thing, it's all on my other talks. So I'm going to just touch on certain subjects now. This subject that I'm going to talk about now involves this very topical subject, okay, of Russia. Now, part of my whole, not only
I want to spend some time talking about Russia.
Yeah, but also something happened to me. Part of my story is that I'm going to touch on is that I explained in my first part of my story that my journey and connection getting into the Krishna is very different to yours and your generation. You came doing a comparative religion. I was a hippie, young hippie, getting involved with psychedelics, and then I joined the Krishna movement. So all those years when I was in the Krishna movement, and when I moved out, I met loads of Krishna devotees who were very, very similar. They'd done the same thing. And when they moved out the bubble, they had a burning desire to retake their psychedelics. And you're a very different person after you've gone through this intense priming and training. When I was a teenager, I had a certain kind of mindset, and I wanted to see what happens when you take psychedelics after this journey. And that's what happened in Pokhara. They grow magic mushrooms in the Himalayas, and I bought some one day, and I had this most incredible experience down by the lake in Pokhara, so powerful that and mystical, and I connected with the super soul, and I actually had a kind of an insight into this term that's discussed and debated called Atmarama. And there's a famous shloka that's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave many interpretations. It's a section in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Prabhupada has endless purport, but it's the term Atmarama, to take pleasure in the self. You see, we can talk about this and that, but what happens on psychedelics is you have this kind of really bizarre experience where you go into a different state. But now my psyche was primed with Krishna consciousness, and not only that, I'd also picked up hatha yoga practices, and I'd learned pranayam, and I'd learned these had a big effect on my kind of like. While I was going out of the bubble, yoga really kind of saved me, my Indian music connection, because by being involved with Indian music, there was this kind of umbilical cord to Indian culture. I didn't kind of like disappear off into I was still very much connected, and all of those aesthetic things, all intimately connected with Krishna, you see. But then I had this psychedelic experience. I just wanted to mention it, and it was very profound. And I started to do my sadhana again after it. It kickstarted my spiritual life. In fact, I stopped to smoke pot for a long time. I started to do sadhana, do my japa after this one trip. I just wanted to bring that in as part of the story, because I came back to Nepal after leaving, coming back to England. And that's when this whole Russian story that becomes this Russian story comes about. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail, except to explain that the devotees that I was involved with were doing stuff to raise funds, okay?
In Nepal, in
Yes,
Nepal.
in
Yeah,
Nepal,
yeah.
smuggling contraband, you see. And this one devotee, he came to England and said, Mathura, I want you to come and finish off my project, design it, this temple. That's the reason I went off back to Nepal. I was actually working at Healthy and Wealthy and Wise for a while. Bhagavata Shraya, who I knew, he offered me a job working there. I used to come all the way from Hampton. Look, I was staying up with my parents. This is another big thing. Without the support of my mother and the rest of my family, I wouldn't have been able to have this lifestyle that I have, because a lot of how people get trapped and can't move is they have to rent a place, they have to get involved with a property. I didn't rent. I just stayed with my mother. And because most people can't stay with their parents, it's just an impossible, but my mother was wonderful. My father had died. My brother and his kids were all growing up. We had a big house. And so I was there, and that allowed me freedom. If somebody came and said that you want to go off here, I could go, bye everybody, I've got a ticket. All I needed to do was pack my bags. I didn't have to deal with landlords, property, and any of that. So this freedom that I had, and I didn't have marriage, I didn't have children, so I was single. So this friend of mine, I went off to Nepal to help him build this temple. And it all ended up in a very different place, this story, okay? And I'm not going to go into all the details, except that what happened was that by I went off in 84, okay, and then in 85, we had a bit of a fallout, and I needed some money, and money he'd given me to do this, and the Temple project. I did all these designs. I did incredible designs. I went and copied beautiful carved pillars. I met these carvers in Nepal. They came and checked this place. We were in this project, but it was all destined not to be, basically. But Krishna didn't want to have it. But this was a kind of adventure I had to go on. And we met some people in Kathmandu, and they said, you know what, if you want to make some money, don't go the normal route, go via Russia. And they were a gang of smugglers, and they'd be German smugglers. He said, we've been doing it for years. None of us have ever got caught. So I thought, well, okay, that sounds good. That's because you asked, what, it's like, why Russia? Why did this happen? And it wasn't a plan to go into Russia or anything. It was a matter of changing a plane at Sheremetyevo Airport from Delhi to go to another plane to go to Berlin. And then from Berlin, in those days, it was East-West Berlin, it was still communist, and then go under the metro and go into the other part. At this time, Gorbachev had just only recently become the premier, and the whole talk had been about perestroika, glasnost. It was a new, Gorbachev was giving interviews in the Time magazine. I'd never thought of Russia, Moscow, all these years. What do we know? James Bond, the Dark Empire. We're all brainwashed, but really, I had no idea. Anyway, I was carrying nearly 2 kilos of hash in the body of a false electric guitar that was delivered to me by a German guy. It was a premeditated, and with another friend who'd bought his own guitar from Australia, and he had his one, and we got caught in transit, basically. It was the 28th of July, 1985.
In Moscow.
In Moscow at the airport. And it was, I don't know if anybody's ever seen that amazing movie, Midnight Express, all about it's a famous story by, what's his name? Alan Parker, about this guy getting busted. And I'd seen this movie. It's one of the best movies in Turkey. When it was happening and they were kind of taking us over to take the guitar, because in the density, X-ray machine when you change planes. This guitar that I had, it didn't go and they didn't go like, you know, something's there. Nothing happened. We knew that they were good, these things, but they took us away because they were suspicious, and they had other machines there called density scanners that were more sophisticated. And it was due to these, they could see that inside this guitar was a different substance. That is basically how. And guess where? They put us in this kind of for 3 days in this transit hotel. They were all very polite, very nice. It wasn't like one of these, you know, heavy bus. They were all extremely well dressed, very polite. They were as shocked as we were, the fact that we were getting arrested, because you could see this wasn't a really common thing. And also at that time was a big youth festival in Moscow, and the whole airport was just full of people coming from Cuba, countries connected with Russia. And it was, they put us in this transit hotel. We actually met a reporter who was staying there going on, and I met her in the lobby, and I said, "We just been busted. We don't know what's going to happen. You know, my name is this. If something happens, can you tell the embassy?" And this guard was watching her have this conversation, and he broke us up, you know. And it was all kind of like, we didn't know if they were going to take us around the corner and shoot us. We had no idea what might happen to us.
So you ended up going to prison in Moscow.
Yeah, basically, what was that prison? Okay, when the guys came to the door, and the 4 guys in their immaculate suits, I said, "Yes, who are you?" "The KGB." Suddenly, you know, we've all heard of the KGB, but now suddenly I'm in this country that I didn't expect to be in, and the KGB are there to take us wherever they're going to take us. And they took us to Lefortovo. It's the KGB isolation jail in Moscow. So basically, I could go into infinite detail about the whole story, but I was in cell number 90 for 6 months, and for the first 3 months, not with my friend, they separated us, but I was in a cell with firstly a Russian and a Sri Lankan guy, and then after they went, I got a chap came from Georgia in my room, and all of these experiences were incredible, because the guy Vladimir Grabowski had actually lied to me and told me he was being an Aeroflot official involved with the big smuggling campaign. And after Andropov, after Brezhnev left, he was the head of the KGB. He clamped down, and he was part of that. He'd been in jail for 2 years, but he knew perfect English. He knew pop songs and rock songs from the 60s. He was an expert on Japan. It was actually quite fascinating. And I had the first meeting with the embassy, Bill Somerset, was, I just said, "Well, how often does this happen?" You know, and he says, "Well, I've been here for 5 years. We haven't had any English subjects in jail. And I've checked on our records, and 3 years before that. So in 8 years," and I just thought, why me? Out of all the people in England, in 8 years, I've been selected by destiny to become in this really ridiculous situation.
Yeah.
He was very, very sympathetic. I have to admit, my other friend, Havadana, who was in the other cell, he had a very different experience. The Australian embassy weren't friendly, weren't helpful. He had an estranged wife, an awful mother. I had a very different situation. I had, you know, so, but it was like, but what happened, one of the amazing things I want to say about this experience, because it starts off, it's 2 sections. It was this Lefortovo isolation jail. You have your court case after 3 months, and then you go for this appeal, and that whole process takes 6 months. And then you basically go and do your sentence. And then you go to the Gulag, the labor camp, to do your sentence, you see. And but while I was in that cell and with Vladimir Grabowski, I used to be, you know, I had a ritual. I used to get up, I used to do my yoga in the cell. They wouldn't let me do headstand, but I could do everything else. I used to go to the sink in the room. I used to get a towel, and I used to wash my body every morning, and I used to chant my japa on my fingers, you know, very quietly. And I would sit away. I didn't want to, you know, he knew I was kind of meditating, so he just kept quiet. But one day, I explained in that last podcast this very transformative experience I had in a factory. I don't know if you remember. I was chanting, and I went into a kind of, I had a few of these experiences in life, and this was one of them. I was sitting there in the KGB jail, silently kind of doing my japa in a kind of mechanical way that we can get involved with. And suddenly I went into a state, basically. I was actually in my mind, I suddenly was there in Vrindavan, and I was having darshan of the deities. It's this vision came, and I started to, heave, actually, uncontrollably, emotionally. And I really, and it was more intense than, because I was in a room with a Russian cellmate, and the last thing I wanted to do was kind of exhibit kind of some really emotional kind of thing. So I was trying to control it, but I have to say, it lasted for about, again, 20 minutes. It was incredible. And it was basically, for me, what it was like that first experience I explained, it was a kind of, I felt that was like a dictature. This was, here I am, I'm a Prabhupada disciple, meant to be. And I'm doing something that's not just against, contrary to the kind of vows I've made, but it's also illegal, by legal standards. But it sounds corny, there's that corny Christian song, Jesus loves me, yes, I know. It was Krishna loves me, yes, I know. And it was basically Krishna, I felt that Krishna was saying, look, whatever you do, whatever it is, I love you. I'm there with you. You're my friend. And this has been a big part of my journey, and I don't know what other people has their deal, but I have a kind of, right from the beginning, it's like as I went on in my journey, and one suffers from guilt and all sorts of things about, like, going off and astray on the zigzag path. It's not the straight and narrow, but somehow or other it was like I kept going as I went through life. It was kept realigning to Krishna, saying, "I'm really sorry I am the way I am, but this is how I am." But I offer to you myself, warts and all.
So how long were you in prison in Russia for?
6 months in Moscow, and then we had a 5-year sentence hanging over our head.
Wow.
But we were. Yeah, and then another 14 months at the Gulag, which is a different thing. And actually, that Gulag was actually built by German prisoners of war. So it's like Escape from Stalag 19, whatever it is. It looks like that. You're in that. They buzz you up. You have to wear those uniforms you see them wear, like in China, the padded uniforms. And I had another experience while in jail that was, and we to come to Moscow now. I was very frightened. What's going to happen? How am I going to see my embassy? How am I going? But we did have these very complex kind of journeys going with armed guards that had to take us all the way from this place, which is over a 12 hours from Moscow. And it's part of a complex of gulags, and within it is a foreign labor camp. And that's where we were. It wasn't Russians, but there were Japanese people who were and Azerbaijani, and they were parents were people who'd come from there, come to Russia, hadn't got Russian state citizenship, and they were called nisgridanstva, which means stateless. And so when they had been sent to the foreign labor camp, most of the foreigners there were students who'd been studying in Russia, from Africa. Lamine Fofana from Sierra Leone, who was a good friend of mine. There was another guy called Karimji from Bangladesh who just finished his PhD on geology. But what they were doing as students, they were doing a bit black market, gold, diamond smuggling, this thing. One guy was even involved with smuggling icons with people connected with the British Embassy, all sorts of stuff. And there was a few foreigners and apart from me and my friend, there was 2 other Europeans, 3 eventually, who had been, same thing had happened. They'd gone from Europe, got caught in transit, and we were there at this labor camp, going through this experience, and after some time of being there, as another amazing, I'm just going to tell this one anecdote, and then we can kind of deal with this story. But it's one of these things. In life, you just never know where it's going to take you. I didn't know, how I was going to deal with this situation. There was a lot of fear involved and isolation. But I had got to see the embassy, but I didn't really know what to happen. But I had a kind of an idea that we weren't going to do our whole 5-year sentence. Our family could actually write clemency appeals. This was explained to us. But so what happened was I was put in a catch-22 situation at the labor camp, where if I did something, I would get punished. And if I didn't do it, it didn't matter. I was going to get punished. And I thought, this is actually quite mad. You know, I'm just going to close the window. 1 minute.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, that's better. Sorry. There was a bit of a machine outside. And so it's one of the weirdest things I've ever done in my life. It's so out of character for me because I'm quite a sensuous person and not one for fasting and austerities, really. And it was already austere. But I went on a 10-day hunger strike.
Wow.
Basically.
In prison in Russia.
In Russia, in the labor camp. And I was told by informed prisoners what to do, that once I do it, if I start it, they will come and I will have to fill out an official form. And then it becomes a kind of a legal issue, because if you go on a hunger strike in Russia, is actually a crime. I'm actually performing now. I've gone in there for smuggling, and now I'm about to embark on course, possibly screwing up my life, not knowing what's going to do. But I'd reached the end of my tether. It's like, you know, and I made a plan, basically. And this Austrian chap who was in jail, he was going to be released any day. And we made a plan that if I go on something, you tell your Austrian embassy to tell my British embassy what I'm doing. I'm going on a hunger strike. We had this little plan. And this is actually what happened. And I wrote this, when I went on my hunger strike, they actually put me in the isolator within the jail. In the labor camp, there's a place where they punish people, and it's an isolation jail. So I was in this isolation cell. It's so austere. It's like hell, really. You have a cell, there's no bedding. You just have these wooden planks. You're not, if they catch you lying down at certain times, they can extend your stay in there. It's a whole kind of regime that they only give you this tiny little bit. Some days you don't get any food. And then the next day you just get this other kind of course, non-vegetarian that have been cooked. And, you know, not that I used to eat the meat, but if you didn't eat these things, you would die. But when I came out of that, I actually, I actually wrote what was the reason I was going on this fast. I said, I refuse to eat because I would prefer to die than live contrary to my religious beliefs. What I decided was, I'm going to milk my Austrian friend says, if you want to get out of there, don't play the game, rock the boat, because this is a factory. They don't want people to stop the work going on at this factory. They're making money out of the laborers, and they want everyone to conform. It's a business, basically. Labor camps are a business. So I just went on this, and there was a kind of in the middle of this fast, the embassy called me to Moscow in the middle of the fast. And this was all due to the Austrian guy telling the embassy and the British embassy calling me right at this time. And they were freaking out. Oh my God. And I would deliberately wanted them to freak out. I wanted them to think, oh my God, we've got a religious nutcase here from England. We're trying to make diplomatic, because I was reading the newspaper that Gorbachev and Thatcher were beginning to become friends, and I wanted to go. They didn't want to have some nutty English guy. So I said things like, I believe in karma, and I think it's better to die. So I don't mind dying. I'm going to go on my hunger strike and die. They were all kind of tailor-made to freak them out, you know. But what happened was, I almost started believing my own hype, my own story. I became so convinced that I was actually prepared to do all this. And then during this day, when they came to call me to Moscow, I actually had to go from the camp to this temporary, it's a transit camp, and you spend a day there, and then from there you get a train and get to Moscow. It's a process that you do. And I went to this camp, and just before we were about to go on the train, the KGB officer who I'd met in the camp and the head of the camp came all the way there, and they said, so, Aleska, do you want to go to Moscow? Like kind of threatening that you won't go because I've been this naughty. And I said, I don't want to go to Moscow at all. It's not me. It's my embassy that's calling me. And if I don't come, they're going to think it's very, very strange, because they called me. They want to know why. And then I said, anyway, the embassy knows I'm on this hunger strike now. And they looked at me like, How is that possible? And I just sat there with a smirk on my face. I was enjoying this thing. And then they looked at each other, and then the camp head man, Mr. Belly, Mr. White, he said, Satyal. He realized that I passed this message on to Christian Satchal, the Austrian guy, and he told this thing, and that's how the mess. And they looked at me, they almost shook my hand and said, good move, clever, you beat us. They didn't say it, but it was like they were impressed, and I was impressed. And it's something that, a weird thing where my battle with the KGB.
Can I ask a question? So you referred to how Gorbachev and Thatcher were becoming friends, relations between the UK and Russia were improving.
Yes.
I think you might have alluded to the fact that you were the only Englishman in prison in Russia at that time. Do we know that? Is that true?
Oh yeah. Not just at that time, but the Bill Somerset, the British consul, nobody had been in a Russian jail, British citizen, for 8 years.
Wow. And that
I actually had to feed him information about how to get me out, because it was impenetrable. They couldn't, you couldn't suddenly, there was no way you could find out for an embassy consular staff how to do it. I actually was getting the information, and when I met them, I was letting them know. And I wrote to my mother, telling her. My mother went through this whole thing of getting a clemency appeal translated into Russian to give to the Home Office, to give to Gromyko, who was the president of the Presidium, to get a clemency appeal.
Your story, whilst you were in prison in Russia, did your story make the UK news headlines at all?
Not then. No, not at all.
Okay.
But I was following the news, and I knew that Margaret Thatcher was planning to come. I'll tell you another bizarre thing. Just before I got on the plane to get busted in Delhi, Mr. Gupta, who we knew, because my friend Havidana got caught with gems as well. He had them in the blue tack in his documents. Anyway, Mr. Gupta, we went to his house for, meet his family and for a cup of tea. And as soon as we arrived, he said, this is my adopted son's uncle. He's a palmist. Show him your palm. I just arrived at their house. This is 3 days before leaving to Moscow. And I put my palm out, and he looked at me, and his face just dropped. And he said something in Hindi, and Mr. Gupta asked the whole family to go out of the room. And it was silence. And he looked at me, very grave. And he said, you don't mind me telling you something? I said, no. I said, no, but really, you don't mind. He said, okay, tell me. You're going to be in jail within the next 2.5 years, 60% chance. In other words, it's pretty likely, And so there was a little mark on my hand where he told me it was. And it's really bizarre. This little box, just about a few months before I got released, it started to break away from my lifeline. And I could see it was like a kind of engagement restriction. It was just bizarre. And I saw it broke away. So what happened was, my mother wrote the clemency appeal. Margaret Thatcher was planning to come. She came on the 27th of March, 1987, for the first visit, official visit of a British Prime Minister to Russia, because they'd become, it'd been thawing. And guess what? Part of that story was getting me out of Russia before this happened, so there was no glitches. So when they decided to release me, I literally went straight from the labor camp with an armed guard to the place where you catch the train, went to Moscow, and I had a whole day. Basically, I had a guided tour of Moscow. 1 minute I was in the labor camp, and the next minute I was with this guard who'd been in a uniform and been on my case, and now they were all friendly and nice. I went through, is it Peter's Square, the square? We went on the metro. We tried to go to an Indian restaurant in Moscow, but it was closed. And so I had a few hours. It was so surreal being free, and not being able to tell anybody, but not being free. And then when I went to the airport, the assistant consular, she was there to make sure I got on the plane. And so then I got on the plane, came back to England. My fat parents were waiting for me, my mother, my brother, and I went home. And within the next day, my school buddy came over, Gordon, who I mentioned before. I'd had my first psychedelic experience. We were old buddies. He said, They were all waiting for me to cut out of jail because they all knew about it. He said, "You've got to tell the story." We have a friend called Rob Bell, who's a journalist, local journalist, and he knew everyone. Baz Bambingoin, you know, he's a gossip columnist for the Mail, a black chap. He's a really interesting kind of he's come from Africa. He's from a royal family, but knows everybody. And he told us what to do. He said, "Don't go for the serious newspapers. You have to go for the Mirror. They're the ones where you go." So we went to the Mirror, and basically we were, you know, my friend Rob Bell, I said, "I'll give you a cut of whatever we get, you know, whatever they give us." And we started off at, you know, 25,000. You know, it's so weird. Within 24 hours of being released, I'm suddenly at the Mirror building in London, and they're kind of giving me champagne and things like that. And, you know, I'm some kind of hero. It was really bizarre. And then you know, going up onto the roof and doing a deal with Robert Maxwell, you know, about how much they're going to pay me, you know. Eventually I got $5,000. I got 5,000.
So just to clarify, you met Robert Maxwell.
No, I didn't meet him.
Okay.
Negotiations were going on. He was upstairs. We were on the 15th floor. And it was like my friend was my agent. We were trying to get 25 grand. They were going up there trying to find out. And then they were coming back again saying, "No, we can't do 25 grand. If you'd got caught with jewels or something, that wasn't a big deal in the West. But because it was enough, you know, hashish, you know, we looked at it, we thought, okay, you know, when you do a business deal, you always start at a high thing. And, you know, we were lucky to get $5,000. So it's great to come out of jail penniless and then instantly to have some money in your pocket to live on. So
you did sell your story to the Daily Mirror,
and it was a double Sunday spread over 2. I don't want to give the title because it's too direct.
Wow, it's fantastic. Your story about this is why I wanted to particularly talk about Russia, because it's quite phenomenal. I mean, I don't know any of the devotees that have been imprisoned in Russia for drug smuggling, basically. No. It's not an everyday thing, is it?
No. And also, you see, in jail, even though there was Pravda and Izvestia, nowhere was it mentioned about the Chernobyl incident, which actually happened while I was there.
Wow.
You know, it happened at that time. It was a momentous time. Gorbachev, you know, he was going to do his thing, and then, you know, you know, this is 87, and was it 91 when communism kind of collapsed? Only a few years later.
Yeah.
I don't want to say to me being there that happened.
I'm kind of conscious of the time, and in a minute I want to talk a bit about your music, your book, your YouTube channel. But you mentioned 1991. So can we talk a bit about what you were doing in 1990, 1991? You were in Mayapur.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about that and what you were doing there, because this is obviously, you came out of prison in 1987.
Yes.
So just 3 short years later, you were back at the kind of world headquarters of ISKCON. Welcome back into the family.
The last thing that I ever expected. But before that happened, actually, I actually went through as one goes through life and one faces all these different things in life, it's a challenge. Life can be very, very challenging. And I went through 2 major crises. I call them existential crises, dark nights of the soul. And through all these processes, what's going on is I'm being stripped of my kind of ego and my kind of my sense of who I am and what I am and everything. And I have to keep realigning and kind of like keeping my sanity. And while I was before going to Mayapur, I was in Germany, and I ended up kind of like in Lüneburg with a friend of mine, which is a lovely town south of Hamburg with forests around it. And I used to go for a Japa walk, and I was literally, it was one of the most awful headspaces I've ever been in. Most people would say I was verging on a nervous breakdown. And a new term for these kind of called spiritual emergency. But what happened was I actually got reduced to this state, you could say, where I sat on this log one day with just chanting japa. I came to this beautiful kind of log in the forest. And I remember sitting there, and I literally prayed like I've never prayed for years, really, at that moment. And I had to admit, I didn't know who I was, what I was meant to do, where I was meant to go, who I was meant to do it with, anything. And I said, Krishna, I know that you've created me. You're the source. You have my best interests at heart, and I have no idea anymore. You put me in the right place, doing the right thing and everything. And literally from that moment of that peak pinnacle, my whole kind of intensity of my crisis kind of started to reduce. The only thing I knew that I wanted to do was go to India. And while I went off to India was I cleaned, I stopped smoking, I started doing this thing. I thought I want to be in the most auspicious place in the universe for the new decade. So I organized it and I arrived in Mayapur on the 31st of December, 1989. So I'd go to sleep and wake up on the 1st of January, 1990. In Mayapur, and I hadn't been there for ages and ages, and I had a beard. I looked a bit like a Baba. I didn't look a mainstream Krishna devotee, but the devotee who met me at the gate, he was the door was kind of very different. He was a really nice South Indian brahmachari. I told him a little bit about, and he said, "You know who you should talk to?" And I said, "Who?" "Atma Tattva Prabhu." I said, "Atma Tattva." I didn't really know Atma Tattva. Who is he? So the next morning, I went to the first ISKCON classes I've been to for years and years and years. And I sat in the class, and Atma Tattva, this Indian devotee, gave this class, and it blew my mind. I thought, this person, he's not your average devotee. I don't want to be derogatory, but he stood out as somebody having insight, wit, depth, knowledge, and it was really weird. It took me by surprise how it affected me. I was sitting in the restaurant a bit later, and he wandered through, and I said, "Nice glass you gave there." And he looked at me and he said this really strange thing. He said, "If it's all a dream, this is the best dream." And I went, "Wow, that's totally different." And he made so that night, I started thinking about, I've got to meet this guy. So I went over to the Gurukula, and in that which was a beautiful setting. It was like the villages in Bangladesh I'd been. It was all aesthetically beautiful, in my sense of beauty. It was actually the most beautiful project I'd ever seen in ISKCON. And it had these lovely thatched cottages, bamboo, little ponds. The floor was cleaned with earth. And Atma Tattva was there. And I went to see him, and he said, "Oh, I just was talking to my wife about you." I said, "About me?" But he said this morning in that class there was this English guy with a beard, and he was the only one that got my class. And I said, "Okay." Next morning I went to see him. He said, "Come at 6 o'clock." I went there, and he said, "Choose a flower, choose a number, do this." It's called Prasna astrology. And at that moment I asked him what, because I didn't know what to do, and he said, "In 2 months' time you'll know." I went, "Okay." So this was January, and I thought, maybe what I should do is go back to Bangladesh, because I've been there 1990 overland. Then I went back in 1983, and I had this great affinity for Bangladesh, and the devotees loved me there. I was accepted, even with so I did. I went over to Bangladesh, and I went down to Chittagong. There's a lovely devotee called Nishtula. And what I ended up doing was writing an essay. I was suddenly compelled, because I was coming back to Mayapur, and I'd found out there's 6 GBCs in Mayapur. So I thought, maybe now they're ready for me. And I thought about this. I'm going to write an essay on the preservation and the necessity of the preservation of Gaudiya Kirtan. And I wrote this essay, and Nishtula helped me do it on a computer. I came back to the festival, gave it out to all the 6 GBCs, and the only one that really responded to me positively was Bhakti Charu. He said, "Nice, good article." And then the festival finished, and everybody went, and I was still stuck with not knowing what I was meant to do, where I was meant to go. And then so I wandered over back to the Gurukula, and there was Gurukul Maharaj, Bhakti Vijayapurna, just sitting there. And we'd hardly talked. I'd been talking to Atma Tattva, and I just said, I started talking. I said, "You didn't see this. I didn't give you one of these articles." And he said, "No, let me have a look at it." And I handed him over this 6-page thing I'd written. And he was just literally sitting there, and he'd gone through the first page, and he looked over me and he said, "I've been waiting for someone like you for the last 6 years to come here and help me with the music project." And I was like, "Am I hearing the right thing?" And then I said, whoa, slow down. I said, "Look, I have a beard. I've been out of ISKCON for 10 years. I've been busted in the labor camp in Russia. I've done the thingy and the thingy, and I was very honest with him. And he said, "Look," and he said, "What we can do is trial, 1 month. You see if you like it, we'll see if you like it. If it's okay, we'll send you to Malaysia and you can get a student visa and come back. And so in 1 month, I did that, and we all liked it. And I ended up going to Malaysia, and I got a 5-year visa and came back to Mayapur, and we started to develop. There was a kind of, look, this plan to build the big temple in Mayapur was there. And this is the whole thing, if anywhere in the world, authentic roots Gaudiya culture should be practiced, it should be at the place where it started.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so in terms of music and kirtan, it's like if you go to Nathadwar, the Nathadwar, Srinathji, it's the Vallabha Sampradaya. They have the temple musicians at the back performing Havali Sangeet, classical bhajans, devotional music to the deities, as part of the Ashtakal Leela Seva. This is all quite esoteric, and it's all where aesthetics, ragas, music, bhakti all converge. So the goal was to try and do research on Gaudiya Vaishnavism, get all the different songs by the great acharyas, put them into categories of ragas, and then also create a curricula so that children who are coming from the very first day of their first cartel beat can learn music, but in a Vaishnava package, and so that, some become talented. And they're like Naru Gopal, he was like the prodigy musician person there. And there was a Mridanga teacher that we got called Bablu, he was a professional kirtan player, but he was also connected with the Gaudiya Math, and he was teaching Mridanga, you see. So, and then after a few months of working on that project, he asked me, he said, look, you speak good English. Why don't you do a reading English class? So I said, yeah, but don't grammar. Let's not do grammar, but I can do reading. So I became involved in the Gurukula, basically. And then that was 1990. When 1991 came, another very eccentric person, I won't get into him too much, became part of the project. And the management guy, chap said, hey, why don't you guys put on a workshop during the festival in 1991? And we both said, yeah. He said, here's a budget, here's some money. They even gave us some money not much. And so I became very excited, and we're going to provide the link at the end of this to a talk that I gave in Mayapur about the history of Gaudiya Kirtan. It's the historical bit, and it also includes some Kirtan from lovely devotees from Bangladesh, including Krishna Kirtan, who actually unfortunately passed away last year. And he was the most advanced, you could say, technically proficient kirtaniya in the whole of ISKCON from Bangladesh. And we got on very well, and I traveled with him in Bangladesh. So that's a video I gave. I gave the historical talk. But, my deal, I told you, was that I was working in this project. That was the deal. I'm not in ISKCON. I'm working on a project, a bit like Surabi. I said, I'm going to shave my beard, and I won't shave my head, and I'll have it I had long hair, and I have it tied like a seeker at the back, like a South Indian Brahmin, and I'm going to wear a South Indian dhoti. But I followed all the regulative principles. I used to get up and go to the Mongol Arctic. It was a very good time in my life. It was, to wake, and they had my own room. I had my own room, and I used to stress out sometimes and go, shouldn't I be doing a bit more? And he used to just say, just relax. We're in India now. This is a project. And I used to feel very calm. But there was an issue that happened, and I don't want to get into it too much, but there's all sorts of issues that we know about Gurukulas. And it was Bhakti Vijayapurna, suddenly incidents had happened at the Gurukul that I didn't witness, that I didn't even know was going on. And there was pressure put on him. Atmatattva had left the Gurukula, so they were kind of like together, Atmatattva and him, and then Atmatattva went, and so all the focus on that Gurukul went on Bhakti Vijayapurna. And I went over for a meeting, and he told me, he says, unfortunately, the deal that we did at the beginning, I'm not in a position anymore. My position is weaker here, and people are now in the official ISKCON are wondering about you. Why has Mathura not shaved his head? Why is he not looking like everybody, and he tried to explain that he was working for me. And I went to this one meeting, I thought, here we go again. And do you know what I did? Next day, or maybe that afternoon, I jumped on a train, went to Calcutta, phoned my mother, and organized a ticket. And I organized a ticket to leave and go back to England. I came back to Mayapur, and I said, it's been lovely being here and working on this project, but I'm going. And they were like, it's like in Bombay before, 10 years before, Gopal Krishna said, shave your head, do this, do that. And I said, no, I can't do that. I'm me, I'm who I am. And so this was like 10 years later after being outside. He's like, no, I am me. I'm Mathura Das. I've got my own individual.
Yeah.
So that's why I left. So that was my dabble with that project. Okay, that was 1991.
Okay. And we've got about half an hour left, so I really want to touch on your music, your book, YouTube channel. You've just mentioned, I think you just mentioned Gopal Krishna Maharaj, which actually reminded me to ask you a question.
Okay,
we're going to see the direct link now. I'm going to tell you why it reminded me. So you kind of left ISKCON 42 years ago. You've talked about some of your friends getting married and having kids.
Yeah.
Did you ever get married?
This is another part of the story of individuation. Obviously, a human being, all human being have desires, and you could say that the big elephant, one of the elephants in the room that I came across, and in ISKCON, is sexuality. It's a very complex thing, very, very, very complex thing. And I had to deal with my own issue regarding that, because being a brahmachari in those early days, at that very kind of, when you're growing in your sexuality and you're coming into your prime, your teens, I literally just put sexuality on the back burner. And actually, people used to worry, my friends were all agitated about, being attracted to women. And I didn't really have all those desires, and I didn't really know why. It was a bit of a mystery, and people didn't really, some people kind of assumed that I was asexual or something like that, even my sister-in-law, but it wasn't true, because nobody is asexual. It's a myth, basically. There's very, very, very few people that manage to transcend their sexuality. Very, very few. And due to the nature of, we don't need to follow every detail, but we know within this Krishna movement, there's the most negative stories and scandals, you could say, are all revolving around various forms of abuse of sexuality, or people masquerading as certain things, because there's this uniform that you wear when you join ISKCON. It's kind of, the Gaudiya Math are a little bit different. Generally, when you join, they don't just put everybody in saffron. To be a brahmachari, it's kind of just not just being a sannyasi, it's kind of something you're almost awarded with. It's a statement that you're putting on saffron cloth. And that 1979, I took off my saffron cloth because I did not want to make a fool out of that color and misrepresent it, because I was not pretending to be some austere sadhu. I was not. I realized I am not. I've done it. I've done my training. I've done my student. I was a good brahmachari. I have to admit it. I did that. But now I'm going in another journey. So while I was off in this whole journey of my life, I started to kind of figure, I suddenly realized, and it's quite ambiguous, my sexuality. But I had to admit, I did have was attracted to men, but I never really kind of followed it through. I never really did anything, because I wasn't obsessed with it, And then something really funny, weird happened much after 91, was in 97, through a friend of mine. Okay. I went through many journeys. One of them is meeting this tantric Baba, and you might want to put the photographs up. Now, we haven't put up photographs while we've been talking. Maybe we should.
Let me find the particular photo that you're referring to. I've been so.
We can actually go to the photographs, because we've kind of covered some of the area.
Which one would you like me to show the viewers?
If we start with number 5, then I can quickly just show, and we can quickly go through them. And I'm going to point out this, so people can see the different me's, the different kind of incarnations that I've gone through in my journey. So this first picture that you're going to put up,
can you see it?
Of me. Yeah, I can see it, but I can only see it as a little one, not as a big picture. I can't see it as a.
Hang on. Let me try. This is me not being okay. Let's try something a bit different. Okay, we're going to start again with a screen share. Let me try it this way.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so that's me there in the blue striped t-shirt there. That's me. This is just before we went off to Muktinath with some friends, Havidana, who was caught with me, and Udvaga, and some Nepalese friends. That's just before I got caught in Moscow. So you can move on.
Okay.
To
Okay. Let me try. For some reason, it's not working like it
I'm
should.
28. I'm 28 years old there at that time.
I'm just having a few technical difficulties. Hang on.
Okay.
It's not working like it should work. Okay, let's.
You could just go chronologically through, and
I
then
think what I might have to do is, yes, it's not working the way it should. So if I show now,
what we can do is when maybe you can add them after we've done the talk.
Yeah, you can see number 6, but it's not big on your screen, is it?
No, but basically what's happening, there's about 3 different photographs following, and it shows me in my Baba phase at the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad.
Okay.
With a black beard, and that's kind of 89, number 1990. This is before going to Mayapur.
Okay, let me. Okay, I'm going to try and get at least another photo up to show everybody. Okay, it's having a few. Okay, you can now see this photo bigger.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's me with the black shawl on.
Yeah.
In the middle is a very interesting chap called Brother John, who I met at the Kumbh Mela, who was much older, but he was a disciple of Father Beatty Griffiths.
Yeah, I learned about Beatty or Griffiths at actually A-level religious studies before I went to university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was a fascinating guy. One of the reasons this ashram you see with the red is called the Handia Baba Yogalaya. And there was this Swami called Swami Shantanand that my other friend that you see there with the big grin on and the dreadlocks and the glasses, that was Charandas. And I'd met him in Vrindavan, and he wasn't ISKCON. He was a very interesting guy who'd gone overland to India in 1970 and was an expert on Kumbh Melas and used to know everything that was going on in India, and met every guru, Swami, everybody. And he had 2 libraries, one in Vrindavan and one in Rishikesh. So while I was there, I had a big experience. I wanted to meet different foreigners who had been off on following gurus and stuff. So that was a big thing. That was the 89 Kumbh Mela. There's me again at the back.
I've managed to work it now. Yeah. I can see you at the back there on the right. Yeah.
The other chap with the big tilak on is called Ram Priyadas, and he was the first foreigner to be made a mahant into the Ramanandi Sampradaya.
Wow.
And that Baba.
Sorry. Yeah.
Next to him is his guru Lakshman Das, who was based in the Himalayas, and the other chap next to him was called Kali Kamli Shamasundar Das, a Gujarati. And through him, I met another Baba and got contact with this fabulous family in Meerut, which is north of Delhi. I became. They were a big part in my journey in the next decade in India, basically through that. So let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
That's later. This Baba, at the very front with the turban wrapped around his head, looking, that was a Baba called Shukdev Das Katya Baba. They're the Naga Babas within the Nimbaka Sampradaya. And what you're seeing, and then next person is Jason from America. And then there's me there with my hair there. And we're just going under a pontoon bridge. And so this was 1995 at the Arad Kumbh Mela. We went on a most fabulous boat journey from the Sangam of Allahabad, from where the Ganga and the Jamuna meet, to Varanasi on 7 days. We went on this funky boat. Nobody had done the journey before, not even the boatman, because we were sitting at Kumbh Mela and going, what did the sadhus used to do after the Kumbh Melas? They all must have gone to Varanasi, but not by train and everything. They would have gone by boat. So we did it. You know what? I drunk Ganga Jal and lived off it for 7 days.
Wow.
I wouldn't do it now, but we're talking about 95. I think pollution levels were less at that time. But it was one of the most fabulous adventures. I could go in detail, but just to give you a glimpse of all the weird things. This is a professional photograph. This is Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, his private studio in Hampton, where I live. This is going to be another part of my story. If you go to the next photograph, keep going. That's Crispian Mills from the group Kulashekar. He's the famous family, son of Haley Mills, grandson of Sir John Mills. He came up to the Himalayas met me in India after his first band broke up. This is before forming Kulashekar. And then he went down back to England and formed Kulashekar. That's in Kulu. Let's go to the next picture. Then Ranjit Nath in Lucknow says there's no turning back now. That's a line from one of the songs from the Bindu Babas, you know. Now, he's a Baba that I met in 96. And he's a married man, not a Vairagi, a renunciate. He's a married man, and into all the things that you shouldn't be into if you're a Vaishnava. Not all the things, he was a vegetarian, but the paradigm that he was connected to was a totally new thing, and he had occult powers. Basically, I saw so many these things you hear about, and you kind of want to go, oh, I won't want to get near all that. But we became very good friends, and if sometime I might tell the whole story in another day, but it's such a big story. I'm not going to say. I'm just going to touch on
all
it.
Right.
What I had received from him was a controversial form of initiation called Shaktipad. Now, Shakti is a name for energy, but it also refers to the goddess. And as we know, that Kundalini is kind of symbolized as like a serpent that sits at the base of the spine. And he did a ritual with me where he just touched me, did some mantras, and a wave of light came flushing through my body. And I went off into a very strange state of consciousness for 1 month. And then I made a recording. I went off with him afterwards to his place in Lucknow, to know him much better, and made a tape recording of his prophecies. Now, he had prophecies about what was going to happen to the planet, and many of the things that we're talking about are beginning to happen, and they're happening. And these are part of and I had a book called Awakening to Zero Point, the Collective Initiation by Greg Braden, and it was all about Hopi prophecies and stuff. And I showed it to him, and he went, wow, other people in the world are into the same thing. And so he predicted all of these things. I made an interview with him, and Crispian from Kulashekar took one little phrase from that and put it as a secret message at the end of his first album, K. If you get the K CD and just leave it on playing without turning it off, 10 minutes after the end, suddenly you hear Om Hring Dring Glim Swaha. So my gurus have said, time has come for massive change. Om Hring, and it ends. So he managed to get a message on an album that sold over 1 million copies, basically, this Baba, which is quite funny. And anyway, he passed away, but he was, this experience I had with him was very, anyway, there we are. There's Mayapur Gurukula, that's me on the tambura.
In the 1990,
that is the other devotee who's playing this. The Esraj is this controversial devotee, but genius, called Das Anudas. That I did the seminar, and that devotee on the harmonium is Naru Gopal. We can move on. That's in the Guru. That's the cover of the group album. I did all that artwork. That was the. You know, I did it with pencils. The other person there that we're going to see more photographs is Prana G and me, and there he is.
No, you both are. Wow. Yeah. Cocktails.
So, Prana, we're the same age. He joined in Amsterdam after going to France and coming to Amsterdam, and I met him when I came back to India in 77. We knew each other from then, and he'd been on a journey. He's a very, very charismatic singer and writer and a busker, basically. And then I was going regularly to Mayapur in the decade after the 1990s, and he came to me and he said, can you take me around India, because you know India? And so we started traveling together, and eventually we started collaborating and writing songs and we came up with the name of our songs, the Bindu Babas. This is him and me, just kind of at a place, a restaurant in Goa. He'd been in Goa more than I'd done, more traditional India. He'd been going to Goa. There's a whole international scene there, and we started performing, and we developed a following, basically. And we not only that, we actually made that Bindu Babas was the cover of an album, and guess where we recorded it? A bit of name dropping. I got involved with a group called Bliss Day, and 2 sisters, Vicky and Jackie, are both married to 2 prominent members of Deep Purple rock group. Jackie Pace, Ian Pace, the drummer, and Jackie and Vicky, who's married to John Lord. And I became the cook. And Prana had been in India, and then he came back, and they heard us do our songs. They said, "What are you doing with these?" And we said, "Well, we want to record them, but we don't have any money." And they said, "Well, why don't you do it in our private studio? My son James will do be the engineer." And we went, "Okay." So we ended up doing 3 songs at the house of Ian Pace in their private studio. And then we got them printed, and in 300 in Calcutta, came to Goa, and I did my first ever gig. Now, I'll tell you, before that happened, we started to write songs, and we started to write a song called "Oh India," which tells a bit about that story of meeting Ranjit Nath. And it took us weeks to compose it. Now, Prana was very confident about gigging. I was a bit more nervous. We came to Dharamshala, and while we were up in Dharamshala, there were these really incredible guitarists from America who were like jazz guitarists, and they said they loved us, me and Prana, and they said, "Why don't you come to the open mic night at the Kana Nirvana Cafe, and we'll get you on the list?" And we said, "Okay." I was like, "All right, okay, we're going to go there." So there was about 100 people at this gig, and we were kind of like the last, really. And they started performing, all these people, very sophisticated jazz music. But if you looked at the audience, they were all kind of sitting there and kind of appreciating it. And it was coming to our time to perform, and we went out on a balcony, and I was really nervous, and Prana was trying to calm me because he didn't feel nervous at all. And I said, "Look, you go out there and do Welcome to the Machine, Pink Floyd, and then I'll come on and we'll do Oh India, and then we'll do Garden of Love, 2 of our songs." So as soon as Prana went out and just did, he just stays so a brilliant, charismatic performer. All of the body language, the whole audience started to go, yeah, they could see now we're being entertained. All the other musicians were good, but there was not really an entertainment factor. Then we came on and we did the song, Oh India, which is quite humorous. The result would freak me out. The whole audience went berserk. This guy's father, who was a huge American guy who was in charge of lighting for the program NYPD Blue, he was there in the front seat. He was banging at the table, going, "Ah!" And then I was like, wow. And then this one girl came up to me after the gig with long dreadlocks, and she was very humble. And she came up to me, she said, "I just want to say, I've been depressed for the last 3 months, and this is the first time I've felt happiness." And I went, wow. That was my first real gig. And I thought, my good, we're sitting along writing a song thinking we like it, but you have no idea what you do and what kind of effect it's going to have on people. I can also give another anecdote. My nephew was sitting on a beach in Thailand after being in Goa, and he was just sitting on a beach with his girlfriend, and there were some other people listening on headphones. And the other guy said to him, "Where have you just come from?" "Oh, I've just been to Goa. My uncle's there. He's in a group called the Bindu Bubbers." And the people said, "We're just listening to the Bindu Bubbers now on our headphones." So we became, not, very famous, but, we started to get a following. We can go to the next photograph.
Yeah, definitely. There's another cover album here.
Yeah. So this is a different project. I also met another friend of mine called Darren, and it's through him I kind of he was another person who had been married to a Japanese lady, but also had issues with his sexuality, and through and he had kind of admitted he was either bisexual or gay, and we used to talk about the first person I'd met who I could talk about. It's amazing how you can get through life, and not even until you get to your 40s, you start kind of addressing your issues of sexuality. You can, even just talking about it was difficult before. And now it was easy. And through that friend, we went on a journey. Anyway, this album, you see, it says Times Music. It actually got released in Times Music in India. It's called Ashirvad, which means blessings. And after my mum passed in 95, I got a little bit of an inheritance, and this allowed us to buy good computers. And we traveled around India, Calcutta, Varanasi, did all this recording, mixing in England. It took us about 4 years to get to do this album, and we released it. And I have to say, it's very good. And the production, we spent
it looks very good. It looks very professional, very colorful. You've got the Times Music logo in the top right corner. It gives it that kind of professional edge, a stamp of approval.
Yeah,
it looks fantastic.
It's an hour-long journey album.
So where is Darren now? Not literally. Not the.
Yeah, he's been actually doing work as an extra recently during lockdown in that series called The Great, on Catherine the Great. So
All right.
also he's staying, he's renting well, he's got a room in an Elizabethan mansion in Kent. It's a long story. A lady who's a publisher is the landlady. She does
Wow.
so he's doing his thing. We're having a few disagreements these days about certain issues going on in the world, but everything's fine. He's an
Well, we yeah, it's good to disagree. Actually, it's actually good to disagree and have healthy debate.
yeah.
Let's move on a bit, and then I'm just going to tell you a very quick thing I should have mentioned about 5 minutes ago. But so this is a wonderful picture of yourself.
Yeah. When I turned, you would see, if you go back to, well, don't go back, but that picture of me with prana, you'll see I've got long hair. I'm a bit more kind of bohemian. It's also a sweaty tropical place. When my mum passed in 2005, I was living with my mum. We actually sold the family house. My mum moved to a bungalow in Hampton. I moved with her. After she passed, I decided to, there was a part of me that I'd been like a hippie, exotic persona since before I became a devotee. Then I became a devotee, and then I moved out. But there was a part of me that actually wanted to be, you could say it's a part of my shadow personality, my shadow self, wanted to be just kind of quite conventional. And this is my,
Sometimes we just want to fit in.
yes, I didn't want to fit in. This was a kind of almost a personal identity thing to do with, it's to do with being a man, to do with manliness. And I started to dress like that. And I thought I was actually going to shock everybody after years of people knowing me as I was. And I came back from India, cut my hair, started to wear normal clothes, kind of conventional. And lots of people, like my niece Sadie, she said, "Uncle, I like your new look." And lots of people kind of said, "I like this." And I just thought, good, I'm finally an older person and I can actually adopt this persona now quite happily, and I'm quite happy with it. And so that's one of my things I've gone through. It's my persona, my identity as a male, as a man, and part of that is the look. That's me in Glastonbury. I started my journey, as we mentioned in the last one, when in 1972 on the Glastonbury as a young teenager. I ended up coming and living in Glastonbury, and this is on the May Day when everyone has this. It goes, they have maypole dancing, people dress up and festive, and this is a lovely chap. I'm trying to remember his name now. It's not tall, but he's very charismatic. It's like a kind of being in theatre in Glastonbury. People dress up in costumes. There's great festivals, and so I was there in Glastonbury. It started to become. My friends started to move down there, and so I started to stay there when I came back, because in 2005 my mother passed away. So this whole my place of staying with my mother disappeared. I got a little bit of an inheritance, and that was the first time maybe in my life I didn't have to even think about income for a few years. And that's when I, through friends in Dehradun, which is at the foothills of the Himalayas, about 3 hours west from Rishikesh, I was thinking I suddenly was compelled, I need to write my story. Where am I going to do it? I've been traveling in India. I'd done all the traveling around, and I was a bit tired. And it needed to be somewhere with a climate that I could handle, because I was getting, the heat was getting too much for me. So I discovered I wanted to check out Mussoorie. And Mussoorie is a British Raj hill station that's above Dehradun. So through these friends in Dehradun, I got to meet a fantastically interesting chap called Sudhir Taplial, who had a house from 1840, a kind of mansion, huge bungalow called Cliff Hall Estate. And I was only up there for 2 days, and he was sussing me out, and he had friends of his showing me around different properties. And we were up at the top at the Kashmanda Palace Hotel. I was hobnobbing with Maharajas and all sorts of people like this. It was a really different world. And he was more British than the British. He used to speak on a very posh accent like this, and his father had been a principal of a college in Missouri, and they were so well known, this family. He had been one of the main, and he'd been a journalist for the Statesman newspaper in Calcutta, and knew everybody. Oh, Edmund Hillary. Oh, yes, we did a thing on the Ganges going down the river. Rajiv Gandhi. Oh, when he was a student, used to come here and down here. I would, anybody you name, Vikram Seth, suitable boy. Oh, yes, Mrs. Seth used to come. I know Vikram when he was a young boy. I through my landlord, Sudhir Taplial. Maybe it is, I don't think I've got a picture of him. That's what are is that the last photo?
I think this is the final photo. Let me just check on another. This is the final photo. Yeah.
Okay. So here, that's my brother holding a lovely Abby, and that's my other niece, my younger niece called Sadie. And this is me coming back to England. This is quite near Hanworth, just to show you.
Wow. It's a nice family photo.
Yeah, we basically, due to my family and that house that we all lived in, a joint house, and my mother, and just having my beautiful family, my nephew Tom, Sadie, and we are a very close, warm family, and my brother's children have all grown up to be like I explained in that part one. My brother was an amazing influence on me as a child. He was 4 years older. Everything I got was kind of through him. The rock groups, the music, the thingy, the underground magazines later off, even the pot and the things, but we had a talk not long ago, a few months ago, and the book that I mentioned called Play Power that I read, that was by Richard Neville, about the hippie movement, I actually nicked it off for him when I was about 13 and read it. And that's how I understood what the hippie thing was. And we were discussing it. And he said, you know what? I said, what? He said, I never actually read the book. And I went, really? And he said, and the difference between you and me, my brother said, was I was more into the style and the fashion, but you really believed in the whole hippie ideal kind of thing. And so it was just 4 years difference in our age. But my brother has been a wonderful father, and it's very interesting to see a very kind of liberal, progressive family and how wonderful the children turn out. Not, we had very liberal parents. I have to say, during my whole recently as well, I talk a lot, as everyone can imagine, and I talk a lot to different devotees. And when I hear the stories of what people have gone through in their lives with their families before joining ISKCON and ISKCON, I go, my story is relatively unscathed. Some people, being a devotee in the Krishna movement, you have to divide it. And I also have statistics. Only 300 people were initiated in England by Prabhupada. It's so small. 200 men and 100 women. That's it. The whole of England. That's it. Who actually got initiated initially, in that. Now, I was a single person. I was a brahmachari, and I was in Amsterdam. Now, if you were a woman in ISKCON, your story would be very different. And the only reason I know that is because now, post that story, I've talked to people, but during that time, we didn't really hang out. When you were a brahmachari, everything was kind of, you didn't really hang out with the brahmacharinis. You had your own life. And then I went off to India, and you had friends, but it wasn't, even in India, what to speak of Krishna, in a traditional Indian house, I've been there, the women go off into one part of the house and the men hang out in another part. And they interact, but they don't, it's only really, I've discovered, my upper middle class friends who are very westernized and modern, who are very like Westerners. But traditional Indians, it's all women over there, men here, So I went through the whole ISKCON experience of being not really knowing what the issues were, and even being at the Gurukula in Mayapur and not realizing really some of the really negative things that have gone on. So I've only got to, just recently there was a post by Bhima Karma about his awful experiences, but I never witnessed those and stuff. So around this whole institutional story that people have gone through, people have had very different experiences.
Yeah, and I think ISKCON, certainly in the West, or outside of India, outside of Asia, really needs to get to grips with understanding that human beings have different types of relationships. It's not easy to fit into the Grihastha or Brahmachari model for a number of different reasons. I think I should have mentioned about 10 minutes ago, you mentioned Gopal Krishna Maharaj. I can't remember the context that you mentioned him in, but it reminded me of a godbrother I have who for a while, he was seeking initiation from Gopal Krishna Maharaj. And he told Gopal Krishna Maharaj that he was a gay man. that he found men attractive.
Mhm.
And despite that, Gopal Krishna Maharaj said, well, you still need to marry a woman. You still need to get married to a woman and, you know, maybe have kids, Krishna conscious kids. And of course, this man, I won't say his name. He obviously ran a mile, didn't want to marry a woman. He didn't find women attractive. In the
Yeah.
end, he ended up actually taking initiation from Ridayananda Maharaj, who's a little bit more inclusive on these issues. But yeah, I think ISKCON really needs to kind of try and, certainly in the West, in Europe, in America, you know, understand that we're all different. And that's a good thing. Diversity is a good thing. It should be celebrated. And I, you know, I go to ISKCON temples, and I don't want to sit with the men all the time and not the women. I mean, I don't see what the issue is. You know, I feel certainly when you go to an ISKCON temple in the morning for, you know, the deity greeting at 7 a.m. and all the women are standing at the back. Some of the to start the ceremony, you know, and some of the women at the back have been in the movement 40 years longer than me.
Mm.
Why are they? I should be the one at the back.
Mhm.
You know, so I think socially, ISKCON, it needs to really start to build better relationships and to allow its own devotees to feel more kind of included really in what it's doing.
It's not just an ISKCON issue, though, even though it is, you know, because the other breakoffs of the Gaudiya Math, they also have problems with the sexual issue. I mean, even recently in the Narayan Maharaj Sangha, two very, very, very prominent members of the higher up sannyasis, scandals have come out, because what happens is when sexuality is not resolved, I suppose one of the main things about my journey and my story with myself is honesty. It's all about, I realize, you know, there's that song by Bob Marley, you're running and you're running and you're running away, but you can't run away from yourself. And lots of people involved in spiritual groups, not just ISKCON, they and institutions, and there's this the celibacy story, okay, that's kind of like a lot of people in the Gaudiya mission, or they think that the answer to it is you just put on a saffron cloth and live with a whole bunch of brahmacharis and hope that somehow your sexuality you'll transcend it by doing sadhana and stuff. But it's not what actually, you know, there's a great theory, there's great ideas, and then there's actual reality. And one of the main problems I feel with many devotees, and why people have lost faith with spiritual authorities, is that they've lost their integrity. They can't just be honest with who they are, what they are. You know, we've got people who have been gurus and sannyasis for years who have now kind of, you know, gone off with prostitutes and done this and done that, whatever it is. And, you know, people lose huge, you know, through this process of you know, it's a form of fakery, really. It's pretending to be what you're not, really. And there's, what has that got to do really with the whole process of self-realization? So you can get involved with an institution, follow rules, follow a kind of code of conduct, but what you're really doing is that you're kind of hiding behind who you really are, and missing the point. And sometimes my weird journey has, I had to move out of the institution, and I've gone through, like I've explained, weird stuff, nothing to be particularly proud about, ending up going to jail and this and that. But somehow or other, I haven't deluded myself into thinking that I made a constant choice not to do whatever I was doing that was not bona fide within the institution. As soon as I thought I'm not playing the game or representing the ideals, I'm off, I'm out of here. I don't want my activities to be associated with that institution that has very kind of highfalutin ideals. But the problem has come is that the institution has got a very bad name now amongst many, many people. But one thing that's wonderful about the institution is, like, now there's people kind of distributing food to people. I mean, the things that ISKCON do really, really well are festivals, Ratha Yatras, and big prasadam distribution everywhere. It's incredible. Even with leaders that the institution that I'm not really a big fan of, they still involved in quite positive things. Like even during COVID and in India, there was massive prasadam distribution. You know,
just to comment before we go in a minute, you've mentioned two particular things, and the ISKCON of the UK is good at: Ratha Yatras and prasadam distribution. A lot of that, though, is because of one man.
Yes.
You know, Parashuram Prabhu.
Yeah.
He has lots of volunteers, but you know, if something was to happen to him, a lot of that could collapse overnight, in that infrastructure in terms of Rath Yatras outside of the big cities and places like Glastonbury and Prasadam distribution. Him and his Shakti and the way he's been empowered by God to do these things is amazing. But I would largely agree with you though, and ISKCON is very good at, if you're in the club, it gives you things to do. It gives you access to Srila Prabhupada's books, and there is a collection of gurus to take initiation from, and it does give you that. If you want to conform, it gives you something to conform to. So those that want to conform can.
Yes, and I'm not, even though I might be critical of things, I'm definitely not an ISKCON basher. I'm a well-wisher. And one thing that's happened recently was that I had this talk with one of the controversial members in ISKCON, Swamis, Bhakti Vikash. He invited me for this talk. I was a bit shocked, but we are old mates from Bangladesh. We knew each other, and we have a great love for Bangladeshi culture. And in the second talk that we had, like a podcast, it became a little bit controversial, and at the end I really realized that ISKCON at the moment it's a bit like the world. The world is a bit fractured at the moment. It's been divided through various, we've had the political things going on, and now we've got the Russia thing, and the East and the West, and in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, there's this huge divide between what's happening now in India and the rest of the movement in the rest of the world. And it seemed to me, after talking with Bhakti Vikash, that there's possibly an imminent schism about to happen, and could be, and connected with the Lokanath Maharaj story, and it's kind of dividing East and West, and I have no idea how they're going to deal with it. Actually, after that talk, I actually spoke to Vishaka at the manor, and I said, I can talk to Bhakti Vikash, I can talk to you. You guys seem to have reached an impasse. They can't even talk and communicate, these two different sides. But if anybody wants to utilize me, I'm here. And also Hriday Chaitanya, who I know from Radhadesh in Belgium, he's on the Jeep. I sent it, but I haven't had any feedback, nothing, I just wish them the best, and I have no idea what they're going to do about this issue.
Mathura Prabhu, on that note, we're going to have to unfortunately come to the end of our discussion. We've been broadcasting for almost 2 hours, believe it or not. Okay. It's been wonderful to have you back with us for part 2, and your story is phenomenal. And what I'll do with this broadcast is I'll put a link to your YouTube channel above. And particularly that film from your talk you gave in 1991. If you want to send me that link, I'll make sure people can watch it and everything. And, I've been really fascinated. In total, for 4 hours now, 4.5 hours, we've been talking about your story. And it's a fascinating story. And so many people said to me, oh, you should get Mathura Prabhu on your podcast. And I spoke to someone recently who's a god sister of yours, and she said, oh, Mathura can talk for England.
I'm very well known for that. Yes, you have to kind of rein me in.
It's a great blessing, actually.
Those talks I've given on YouTube, there's 26 of them. And that just takes you up to the moment I leave ISKCON.
They're like 2 hours long, I think, right? And they're like, there's
a bit of song and music. There's no time for a song, isn't it? I was
not today, I'm afraid. I've got to unfortunately go out.
Yeah,
but
I've enjoyed being able. Thank you for providing these platforms to be able to just talk about things, maybe talk about subjects which are controversial or not. Just kind of, there's that thing, walking your talk. There's that phase. I've got another. I've turned it around, and it's called talking one's, not walking. Talking one's walk rather than walking one's talk. I'm actually talking about what's happening, not trying to kind of adjust to some ideal. There's an ideal of philosophy, but then there's reality, and what I've described is the reality. And whatever I've been through, Krishna is there. He hasn't disappeared.
Krishna's always there.
Yes. And so thank you again. And I look forward, if you ever feel that you want to have any more chitty chatter things about all sorts of issues, I'm always here to have another talk. And thanks to all the listeners who've listened. And please check out the links that that Narada's going to put. If you want to check out all my other stories, the Bindu Babas, we have a liturgy of 12 pop songs which contain the kernel of all of Krishna consciousness in quite toe-tappy, good recorded, interesting songs. And the Ashirvad is more of the east-west journey with that. So please turn them in, turn on to them and enjoy them.
Mathura Prabhu, it's been great to have you as the guest on episodes 32 and 33 of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you also to our listeners and viewers at home or wherever you are, sitting in Starbucks maybe, to watch these podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, please do put positive comments. Please do react, hopefully in a positive way. And please do share the links, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, with your friends and family. Until the next episode, goodbye and Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.